Hey guys, what I'm talking about today is this white crystalline powder, and it looks like sugar, but actually it's not sugar. It's something that you really need to use in your garden. You can use it in its natural state and add it to your watering can or whatever you have in your garden that you water your garden with, or you can use it in this crystalline form that you can purchase online. I choose to purchase it online because I think it's just easier. I can keep it in the cabinet. It's shelf stable. It will last for years. And so that's why I use it. But it is one of the most important things you can add to your garden if it's not producing. If it's not producing enough tomatoes or cucumbers or whatever you have growing, this will absolutely help it speed up the process, and you'll be harvesting double, triple in no time. But this is the month where I'm going to be trying to do as many formulas as I can that will help your garden boost before the end of the season, before we reach that first frost date. So anyways, this product is very important to add to your garden if it's not where it should be, and there's probably a reason for it in your soil. So what we're talking about today is citric acid, and what I'm using is the granular form that I keep in my cabinet. My wife actually purchased it a couple of years ago, and I started using it after I heard what amazing effects it can have on your garden. But you have to be careful because you can easily overuse it. So citric acid in the garden makes a huge difference with your tomatoes. As you can see, these tomatoes, I've collected baskets of tomatoes from these, and the citric acid itself is not the fertilizer, but what it does to the fertilizer makes it possible for your garden to flourish like never before. You'll have an amazing harvest. I'm going to go through over 20 things and reasons why citric acid is very important and how it works in your garden. So you can either use the natural form, which I don't normally use, but you can if that's what you choose to use, or you can order the one that I have in the description down below. But it really does work wonders on your vegetable garden. Now you want to use this especially if you have alkaline soils, and another thing you want to use is you want to make sure you have a pH tester for your soil, because it's so important that you don't get the pH of your garden soil, your vegetable garden soil, too low, because if it becomes too acidic then you're going to have a problem. Generally vegetables like to grow anywhere from about 7.5 is the most ideal conditions, and you can go lower than 7, you can go down to 6, but if you get below that, maybe 5.5, you're going to have problems with your vegetable garden. But keeping it in that ideal range is so important, and that's where citric acid comes in. When you mix it properly and apply it to the base of your plants, and you can even do a little bit of misting, but I would do that very carefully, and especially the time of day is important. I'll talk about that shortly. But pH testing is really important. I've had this pH tester for many years, and I believe it's the second or third one I've owned. I've owned some more basic ones, but this is one of the nicest ones I've had, and I'll put a link to that as well. But test your soil first and find out what your pH is, because if you make it too acidic, you may have to do something like add baking soda to the soil to bring the pH back up. So when you add this citric acid to your soil, what you're doing is you're making the nutrients in the soil more available to your vegetables. And that's one thing that's a problem. If you have a lot of fertilizer in your soil, but you don't have the right conditions, your plants can't absorb those nutrients. So just remember that you want to bring it to that ideal point of pH so that the fertilizer that you've used can work. Like I said earlier, this is not a fertilizer, but it aids the fertilizer and helps it to be much more productive. So these zucchini have just exploded in growth, and what I did in a previous video is I did a yeast video talking about how to add that to your garden. I'll link that up above, but I also did this with citric acid to help what's in the soil, the nutrients, the fertilizer, to be absorbed by the plant. So it's really important that you do that. It provides a mild acidic formula to the soil, which allows it to kill off some of the negative bacteria and encourage the beneficial bacteria or microorganisms to grow in the soil. So that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that citric acid can make a huge difference in your soil. Now these cucumbers have just taken off like crazy since I started using this formula. Also, I'm going to attribute a little bit to the yeast, and if you'll watch that video as well, I think that'll explain some things as well. But another thing that's so important is that the citric acid acts as a chelating agent that helps minerals in the soil become more soluble and available to the plant itself, such as zinc, and it is extremely important. Now there was a couple of other minerals that's just kind of I've absent-mindedly forgot about, but zinc is one I know, and I think iron is another, but it really helps the root systems absorb them once that acidic citric acid gets into the soil. So that's really important that you add it. I'm going to say early in the springtime when you first plant, again when everything's growing well in the middle of summer, and then maybe towards the end of the season if you're still producing a harvest there. But you don't want to do this weekly or monthly. You want to do this early, middle, and towards the end of the season. Now, even the people who know about citric acid don't think about using it in their composter. Now, this is a homemade composter I made out of a trash can. Super simple to build, and it works great. I use this composter for all the organic material I cut away from the garden. I put it in here, add a little bit of black cow, and I keep this going throughout the year. So I'm always creating a little bit of compost to add back to the garden. But what it does when you sprinkle 1 to 2 tablespoons of the acidic acid powder over the top of your compost, it creates a little bit of an acidic environment in there, which speeds up and aids the breaking down of organic material. So that's one thing that you may have not considered with acidic acid, is to use it in your composter or in your compost pile. Now, another thing that you can use citric acid for, whether in its natural form or the granular form, is you can put, of course, with this, you're going to use 1 tablespoon of squeezed lemon, lime, orange, tangerine, whatever. The lemon is going to have a lot more acidity to it, so you may want to back off to 1 teaspoon, but 1 tablespoon I would say on average. But as far as soaking your seeds in it for 24 hours, 1 teaspoon in the granular form for 24 hours will help break down the outer coating when you're planting seeds. So that will help you get a head start on getting your seeds started in the springtime. Now, another thing this miracle white powder can do for your seedlings is it encourages root development. So you can do half a teaspoon of the granular type in a gallon of water and water that with your seedlings, and that will encourage root development and will speed up the early development of those vegetables, so you'll get a head start on your gardening next year. So that's one thing. We're in the middle of the season now, and I'm melting like a snow cone in July, but that's one thing you want to keep in mind. Maybe take a note that next spring you'll want to do this with the trick with your seeds, and this with your seedlings. Now, here in Zone 7A, we are very prone to fungal diseases, and that's another thing that the citric acid is good for, is helping prevent those fungal diseases. So what you'll want to do is half a teaspoon of the granulated form into a gallon of water, put it in a sprayer, and mist spray your plants that are more prone to disease about once a week to about 7 to 10 days, right in that area there. So if you are like me and you're high humidity in the summer, you're always getting diseases, try that trick, and that might help you with some of your fungal diseases that are going to pop up throughout the summer. Now, in addition to helping with diseases, it might deter some insects because they're not going to like this acidic spray on your vegetables. But one thing that's really important to remember, that if you're doing a foliar spray, you want to do this early morning before the sun reaches up high in the sky and could possibly do some damage to your plants. Maybe too much heat, and this mixture might have a magnification effect. Some people say it doesn't exist, but I just don't want to take any chances. So I water early in the morning, or mist spray the foliar feedings. Spraying is what I'm trying to say. Early morning or late afternoon, as late as you can go, maybe 30 minutes to an hour before dark. So foliar sprays can also help deter insects. Now, if you have a big problem with aphids in your garden like I do, bumping it up from half a teaspoon of the granulated form to 1 teaspoon and mist spraying every 3 to 4 days, that can help deter aphids around your vegetables. I know that I have a huge problem around my tomatoes with that. So doing this every 3 to 4 days can absolutely deter and drive the aphids away. So it's really, if you're into organic gardening, that's one of the safest things you can use, is a citric acid. Now, if you have a problem with slugs in your garden, sprinkling just a pinch of this around the base of the plants, you have to be careful because you could send the soil you could make it too acidic. So you have to be really careful, but just taking a pinch of this and sprinkling it around just where the base of the plant is, where the tomato, cucumber, that can help deter slugs away because of the acidic nature of these granules. But remember, very small amount, because you can overdo it before you know it. So I would say just a pinch right at the base. Now, another problem that's very common in my garden is ants popping up, whether in the raised beds or in the rows between the raised beds. And I would recommend using 2 tablespoons of the citric acid powder in 1 gallon of water and spraying the ant beds directly. Remember, you've got it a lot more concentrated now, so you want to be careful about getting it on the foliar areas of your plants, and also at the base. You don't want to cause the soil to become too acidic, and you'll have a problem with harvesting, and the plant will just stop producing. So just remember, this more concentrated amount is for spraying directly on small ant beds that pop up throughout your vegetable garden. Now, for you that live in an area that gets lots of rain, like the Pacific Northwest, where you just have constant rain, you may have a problem with mold and mildew in your vegetable garden. And spraying this will help with that as well. Again, about 1 teaspoon per gallon. Spraying it around the garden will also prevent mold and mildew from popping up quite so readily as it might if you don't use this. Now, if your soil is far too alkaline, you can do this trick right here. You can add 2 tablespoons of the citric acid, put it in your gallon size watering container, and then drench the soil. Take a rake like this, small mixing, whatever you have, and just mix it well into the soil, and that can help bring down the alkalinity to that perfect point, as close to 7.5 as possible. Now, I talked about this specific sprayer quite a bit last year and maybe a little bit this year, but this is a solo sprayer I purchased, I believe it was Amazon. I'll put a link to it if it's still available online. But this is really important because it has a little nozzle you can tilt up like that, and you can spray the underside of leaves. And a lot of people don't realize that's where a lot of the aphids and other insects are hiding during the day, is under the leaf. So this really gets in there and gets them when you do that early morning spray or late evening spray. Solo sprayer, I think I have 4 of these now, so it's one of those things that I highly recommend in your vegetable garden. Now, another thing that I would highly recommend doing is doing test areas on 1 plant at a time, because some plants are very sensitive. If you have more than 1 plant, let's say you have 5 or 6 cucumbers, test it on 1 and see what the reaction is, because if it reacts terribly, then you need to dilute it more, or maybe just avoid that particular variety of plant. So just remember, doing a small test area is extremely important. Now, a couple more things that are really important to take into account is if you're misting or you have very sensitive skin, is to make sure you're wearing eye protection and gloves when you're using the mister or pouring a lot of it on the ground, because your skin can become really dried out and it might irritate your skin. Some people have conditions like that that would be really exacerbated by a lot of acidity to their skin. So just remember, take precautions when using it. You are using a very mild acid. Now, since it's all completely natural, it's not going to have an extremely long shelf life. I'd say 2 to 3 weeks maximum. But if you do have some left over, just label it with some painter's tape and write on it with a marker as to what it is and the dilution rate. Just remember to keep it also out of reach of children, because they could take quite a bit of it. It might cause some irritation in the mouth, in the esophagus. So just remember, if you've mixed it really strong, make sure that kids can't get to it. So if you're doing a lot of soil drenching with a large container like this, and you're mixing it a little bit on the strong side, maybe a complete tablespoon, you want to remember, don't do that more than 3 times a year: spring, mid-season, and towards the end of the season, because you can damage the soil by doing this too much. You can bring the acidity down far too much. So mixing this is just so super simple. It's not hard to do. Like I said, if you're going to use fresh lemons or limes or oranges, tangerines, grapefruits, whatever, you may want to add a little bit more juice. But since I'm doing it in this powdered form, I'm just going to add about 1 teaspoon to a gallon of water. You want to make sure you mix it very well so it doesn't come out in a clump on one particular plant. But let's head out to the garden and we'll just do a little bit of watering there, and I'll show you exactly what we need to do. So guys, I'm drenching the base of these peppers with this solution, and I would say it's probably going to come out to about 1 cup per plant. So I'm not using the whole gallon on 1 plant. It's just a small amount, about 1 cup, maybe 1.5 cups. And that's going to work a lot better if you do that in the beginning of the year. I'm really late on planting these peppers, and that's why they're so far behind. I would have some really nice peppers already if I'd have planted them a month earlier. But anyways, this is the perfect product to make your fertilizer become active and really be able to get into the plant and produce a massive harvest for you. So buy a small bag of it. It's not expensive. Keep it under your counter, and then when you need to use it, just mix up a batch. It will last quite a bit longer, and it's a lot less expensive than produce when you figure if you're juicing your produce just for a small amount of garden usage. So anyways, I think this is going to make a huge difference in your garden, and you'll have an explosion in harvest this year. So guys, thanks so much for watching, and I really appreciate it. Have a great day.